Welcome to the Common Cool podcast,
where we discuss the power of addiction,
the art of suffering,
and the joy of freedom.
Welcome to the Common Cool podcast. My name is Miguel.
And I'm Jeff. Today we have Bryce Givens. He's a friend of mine, and I actually met him during kind of an unfortunate time. I was struggling, I mentioned through this podcast, I struggled during, COVID and had gone to rehab and had done some things and had found myself in a position where I wasn't welcome back home. I kind of burned a bridge at my brother's house. And I was looking for a place to live, and I was really resistant to sober living. And that's where I met Bryce. I moved into one of his sober livings and enjoyed it. Great place. And I thought it was just really important to kind of bring him in, hear his story, and also to kind of he's an expert in the sober living space, and to provide some of that education for people to help with that. So, Bryce, I'm going to hand it over to you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're up to.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, fellas. I really appreciate it. Jeff, you were on my podcast last week, and it was really awesome to be able to hear your story more in depth and get to know you more. But yeah, I'm very, very excited to come and share what we have going on, and really what the sober living space is about, and the importance of community, and share my story so that if anybody listening is looking for the next step in the phase of their progression in recovery, then, give them some options or some ideas or resources so that they can reach out to whomever may be a best fit for them. So glad I'm here, fellas.
Cool. Yeah. Just tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, how did you get into sober livings? And
yeah, totally. Well, we'll keep it short. We'll keep the story short because it's, we could have a few hours on this, and I've spoken a lot on this, in the several years that I've been in this space. But basically, my story starts, I was the son of a professional athlete. My dad was a pro baseball player. So growing up, sports and athletics and structure, were very much ingrained just in my identity. I always looked up to my dad. He was always, a larger than life figure, and a strong personality. And so from an early stage, in my formative years, everything revolved around, competition and sports and doing the best you can, and perfectionism and expectations, and sort of these characteristics. Fast forward, we'll go to high school. High school started, that's when my journey into experimentation and recreational use into drugs kind of really started. It was about sophomore, junior year in high school. I was already excelling in football, and, started to smoke weed and would take pills here and there. Then we, our friend group started to get into ecstasy and, just dabbling, like normal sort of middle-aged high school activities. And really, I think for me, one of the biggest things was, and I come to find this out later on when I actually started to do a lot of work on myself, but entitlement was a big thing for me. I think growing up the son of a pro athlete, being around and associated with high performers, high achievers, and how our society treats athletes.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
I kind of developed that sort of personality. And then I had seen that in my own self, in the sense that I was very highly recruited coming out of high school, could have gone to any college that I wanted to, was an All-American, really excelled in academics as well without putting forth really any effort. And so I think that's where some of my bad habits really started to develop. Ended up going to University of Colorado up in Boulder to play football. I wanted to stay close to home for a number of reasons. I made that decision. My family was here, so I wanted them to see me play. I thought that the program was on the upswing. I knew that I could play early. So there was just a number of reasons going to CU. And turns out the first year I got to CU, Playboy comes out, back in 2008, they had their publication still, and they came out with like the top 10 party schools, and CU was number one. And so being a person who liked to kind of push the boundaries, set high expectations for myself, was really like a social person, wanted to be in the mix. I found myself really trying to juggle academics, athletics, and a social life, and just wasn't well equipped to do that. I started partying too much. Things kind of got out of control, started to let my academics slide. And that's when I was first introduced to heroin, was my freshman year. And a lot of people don't know this because I kind of glaze over this in telling other people, but I started dabbling in heroin. There was a kid in my dorm, and he's like, hey, you want to try this stuff? I had, kind of nagging injuries from football. This is in the fall of 2008. And we started taking this heroin in this liquid form. We would just add water to it, put it in a nasal bottle, and shoot it up our nose. And so I instantly, had that taste for opiates. That quickly progressed into a huge problem. And so about October or November of my freshman year there, I went to my coaches and I was like, hey, I have a serious problem. I'm addicted to this stuff. I can't get off of it. I'm not going to class. I was still maintaining my athletic requirements, showing up to practice. I had redshirted that year. So I don't know if people know this, but in college athletics, you have 5 years to play for. And so typically what happens is like a freshman will come in and they'll redshirt, which is basically like you're in school, you're a part of the team, but you're not playing. So needless to say, I told my coaches, they're like, look, we got to get you some help. So they sent me to a rehab. So that was my first stint in rehab, was 2008. Got out, really kind of was sober for a good 6 months to a year, completely sober, no alcohol, no weed, no nothing. But then it slowly started to trickle back in. Like once the complexities of juggling college life and academics and everything, and slowly started to chip away at that sobriety. So that story was then repeated multiple times over and over in college. And ultimately what ended up happening was I threw away my football career. I got kicked off the team. I transferred to another school. I transferred to Arizona State University and ended up getting in trouble down there. Same situation, same story, right? History's repeating itself, and I'm not getting the picture. So fast forward to 2013. Now I'm down at another school. Now it's at a Division II school down in Pueblo, Colorado State, Pueblo. We are a really good football team, really solid program. I was still trying to pursue going to the NFL, right? That was my ultimate goal. And once again, start getting back into drugs. And we know how that story ends up. So I ended up, failing an NCAA drug test, and that lost my last year of eligibility. So I was now in this position to where I'd lost my identity with football. I, didn't finish my degree. I was fully addicted to opiates at this point, doing oxy all day long, every day, smoking weed. And I was in a relationship with this girl, and that exacerbated it as well, because she was also an addict at the time. Who now we've just recently talked about 6 months ago, and she's 4 or 5 years into recovery as well, which is awesome to hear. But, so I found myself in this position where I was dating this girl, and, we were both full-blown drug addicts. Next thing you know, I am trying to support my addiction by, middlemanning drugs, getting it wholesale, selling it retail. That quickly turned into, starting to pick up bigger and bigger amounts. My girlfriend and I at the time broke up. So now I had lost my identity, had lost really my relationships with my family, had lost, pretty much everything that I'd worked so hard for growing up. And on top of that was in a deep addiction. So what does anybody in their right mind do? Well, they decide to turn it up another gear and start selling drugs. So I got connected with, a distributor, and I started distributing. And then that really turned into really about a 2 or 3 year crime spree where I was, doing a lot of drugs, selling a lot of drugs, and also committing crimes, not really, just being completely reckless. I ended up getting charged and convicted of distribution with the intent to, distribution with the intent to sell. Well, it was basically, I got an 8-year prison sentence. Let's just put it that way. That was a real eye opener for me. Obviously, I think it would be for anybody. But still being in the midst of that addiction, what happened was, if you're going through the court system, it takes a really long time for a court case to happen. So during the time that I had, bonded out of court and was waiting for arraignment and the next court cases, I was still out there committing crimes. I was still out there doing drugs, still selling drugs. And so this is all of 2015. I ended up catching a bunch of more cases, possessions, reckless endangerment, driving, like running from cops, all kinds of stuff. And fortunately for me, I had not been in any other trouble before this. And so when I got sentenced in our pretrial screening, they're like, you clearly have a serious drug problem, and a lot of your actions and behaviors are based on the drugs that you're putting in your body. So they fortunately sentenced me to this place called Pier 1. Pier 1 is a behavioral modification therapeutic community, and it was a very intense 2-year program. It's like a 2-year rehab where you work on rational emotive behavioral therapy and seeking safety and cognitive behavioral therapy and like intense programming for 2 years straight. And that place saved my life. So when I got to Pier 1 in, February of 2017, I had made a choice, right? I was like, I'm going to change my life. I'm going to turn this around. And I did everything that I could to really start to work on myself. I was there for about 9 months, and then you start to go work, right? So for the first 9 months, you're on site, you don't leave, you're there, you're programming all day long. It's a very intensive program. So once I start going to work, that voice in the back of my head starts talking to me again. Oh, okay, cool. Well, now you got some more freedom, some more leeway. I know you're not going to go do heroin, but there's this stuff called Kratom. And there were some guys that were into the program, and they're like, hey, there's this stuff, Kratom. You can get a little buzz off of it. So I was like, you know what, I'll try it. So I started taking Kratom, and I did it for about 2 months. I did it until New Year's Eve in 2017. And I was like, I had this kind of revelation. I was like, look, I need to cut this shit out because you know what? Ultimately, I'm going to end up in prison if I don't get this thing together. And I saw things slipping, right? I saw the same exact behaviors that I had experienced when I was playing football in college, like that same trajectory unfolding right in front of my eyes. And so I stopped. I made a decision. I was like, I'm going to stop. I'm going to quit, and I'm going to get through this program. I'm going to graduate and move on with my life. Well, in therapeutic community, a big component of that of the TC is being your brother's keeper, holding people accountable. They sometimes call them snitch programs, right? Because everything ends up coming out of the wash, right? It's like if something happens and somebody gets in trouble, they have these punitive actions which are uncomfortable. They called it MONAD, meditation on negative actions and decisions. And what you would have to do is go stand and look at a wall, literally for hours and hours and hours on end. The longest stretch that I had to do MONAD for was 10 days from 5 a.m. to 11 p.m. So it's like intense time out, and you're not allowed to do anything because basically they're dangling this carrot over your head and say, okay, if you don't want to participate, you can go to prison and we'll call the cops right now. And since you're sentenced there, it's like you have to do that. Well, anyway, people get scared of that. And so when they get in trouble for whatever reason, things start coming out, right? And so they start to tell on other people. So what happened is in March, I was getting ready to graduate the residential portion of the program and move down the block, is what they call it, to the outpatient portion of the program. And I was supposed to move out on the following Monday. And then the Thursday that this happened, so I was a few days away from moving to outpatient. I get home from work. Mind you, I'm sober. I had already made that decision on January 1st that I wasn't going to do anything anymore. And they put me on Monad, and I was like, this is really, really weird. So I asked the peer commander, and I'm like, hey, what's going on? And he's like, yeah, you're going to prison. And I was like, for what? And he's like, just stay on Monad. So they bring me into the office and they tell me, hey, program non-compliant. You're not complying to the rules of the program. We went back and we tested some of your drug tests from November and December, and you popped hot for Kratom. And I was like, okay. At the time I was furious, but then as soon as the paddy wagon pulled up, and I get in the back of the car, I'm sitting there and I couldn't help but just laugh. Like I was just hysterically laughing, like laughing almost to the point of tears, because I knew for me at that point that was my breakthrough moment and like the turning point in my life, because I was faced with this decision. I said, I can either stay down this path and bullshit and continue to do the same things and I'm going to get the same result, or I can do things differently. And I can change my life and I can be the person that I was meant to be, and I can self-actualize and self-realize and reach my potential. And so for me, it was just like, that was the defining moment. A lot of people, that we talk about in recovery is like, they have this defining moment of like that they are responsible for making the decision, right? Nobody else can choose for you. And for me, that was that point. And I chose for myself and I said, you know what, I'm done. This is going to be the life that I live. So not to draw this story out more than it already has been. I ended up going to prison, and the time that I was in prison, fortunately, I was also put in a TC program in prison. And so it was essentially like a year-long sabbatical for me to really get a second chance at doing the therapy and doing the work that I needed to do to come out the person that I needed to be. So I was reading a lot. I was hanging out with people who were on the same mindset as me, that shared the same values, who wanted to use this time to progress in their life. And that's really where the seed started. For me, is my roommate in prison, my cellie. His name's Robbie Mitchell. He's my business partner with Elevate. And we were sitting in there and we saw all these people that needed support. They didn't have financial support. They didn't have family support. They were good guys and they wanted to do right. And so I was like, we need to start a program to help people realize how to develop the skills and the tools and the fundamentals that are necessary so that they can live a self-fulfilling life. And so that's really where the seed was planted and the brainstorm really started. Now we'll fast forward a couple of years. I get out of prison. This is 2019 now. I am working jobs. I had a number of different jobs that I enjoyed, but I just wasn't finding the fulfillment that I wanted to. And at the time, my now wife and I were dating, and I had a couple of friends who were going in and out of rehab, in and out of sober living, and we were looking at buying a house together. And so this kind of idea clicked, and I was like, well, why don't we buy a house? And in real estate investing, there's this concept called house hacking. And what it is essentially investors will buy a house and they'll live in a portion of the house, and they'll either rent out a portion of they'll rent out some rooms for Airbnb, or they'll do some long-term rentals or medium-term rentals for like traveling nurses or whatever. And I was like, why don't we just do this for sober living? Let's live in the basement and open up this program where we can really help guys and start this program up. So that's what we did. That's where kind of Elevate started. And the whole mission behind Elevate was to, really give people the framework to get clarity in their lives so that they can essentially build a system or a roadmap to accomplish the goals and aspirations that they have. And a lot of that comes from the things that I learned at Pure One and the things that I learned in Therapeutic community. It's like you have to change your mindset in order for you to change your actions. And so our program was very focused on how do we change our mindset? How do we do these cognitive switches? How do we implement the things that we're actually learning and practicing so that we can get the results that we want? And so, yeah, we started Elevate back in 2021. We opened up our first house, and now we have 7 homes across the metro area. We have an apartment complex, which is like a 32 unit apartment complex. And then that has led us to some other endeavors in the space where I think there's opportunity to kind of create some value. I mean, I know, Jeff, you're a clinician, you're a therapist, and what I wanted to do was kind of take the clinical approaches out of recovery and focus on, okay, we understand this trauma aspect, we understand stress mitigation, we understand all of these things that people go through in treatment, but what do we do post-treatment? And so that's led me to numerous different avenues in which I can kind of help our members really understand the importance of community, the importance of connection, the importance of lifestyle, what whole person health really is. Like, how do you take care of your mind, body, and spirit? And then how do you do that collectively with other people so that you can really habitualize this and turn this into something that is life lasting? So yeah, that's a brief overview of my history and how I got into it and what we're doing specifically with Elevate Recovery Homes. And then we can kind of touch on too, we ended up seeing a huge need in the clinical space, specifically in regard to peer coaching. So we opened up our own practice. We are True North Recovery Services, is a 2.1 level licensed facility, joint commissioned accredited. And so we provide IOP services. But I think the main focus of True North is we are a managed service provider for about 15 other organizations. And the main goal is to help these organizations have a framework so that they can implement a really strong peer model within their business. So we help them with compliance. We help them with supervision. We help them with the billing component. And then we also, and most importantly, help them with continuing education. Like, once you know something and the education doesn't stop right there, we always have to keep our foot on the gas to learn more, to do more so that we can be as effective as possible. Because I don't know if you guys, Miguel, I'm not sure how it is where you're at in Northern California, but in Denver, it's pretty rough out here. There's a lot of people struggling. And so we're really trying to reach those people and give them an opportunity to get their lives back under control. So that was the motion. Yep. That was the mission behind True North. And then we actually have our own nonprofit, which is agnostic to both of these other entities. And that's where all the peer coaching for our members that are under our care is conducted. And that's called All the Way Well. And so we provide recovery housing scholarships for people to get into sober living, and we provide peer coaching. So we're super excited. We got like these 3 entities, and they're all, cross-collateralized, even though they're separate. It's within the same space, and they share the same values and characteristics of what I think are important in recovery. So super excited.
Thank you for sharing all of that with us. First of all, thank you for being so vulnerable. There was a lot of accountability and vulnerability in your story. So thank you for that. Even that alone, I think, is helpful for people listening to this. And not to mention how awesome you've come out on the other side. I think it goes to show that desperation is a gift. When we hit those bottoms, like the ones that you hit one after the other, you keep going further down. Like, at some point, we reach such desperation that it turns out into a very different life story from that point on. There's a couple of things I want to unpack that are very unique to your story. One is Kratom. Let's talk a little bit about Kratom, because it's a substance that is not often talked about, and it seems like it's part of your story. It was part of my story as well, and I think there's a lot of misunderstandings about Kratom. So, I guess, what is Kratom, and is it an opiate or is it not? There's a lot of debate on that. What is your opinion on what Kratom is, and if an addict should stay away from it or not?
Yeah, totally. So chemically, I'm not sure which receptors it hits on, if it's an opioid or, molecularly, I'm not positive on how it would be classified. But I can tell you what, it sure does feel very, very similar to opiates. So Kratom is essentially it's plant material, typically from plants that are in like Southeast Asia. And I believe it's like either the leaves or the tree bark, and you get it in, bark. Okay. And you get it in a powder form. It's like a green substance, and people can purchase it at like a head shop or over the counter. And really you mix it up into some water and drink it, and it gives you a very euphoric. I mean, some people don't feel euphoria when they take opiates. They get nauseous and sick, but it's very euphoric for somebody who has that taste for opiates. And it is very akin to an opiate feeling. Now, I would say if I could make it analogous to some other substance, it'd be like for people who have indulged in cannabis or marijuana, it's like spice. So it's like I wouldn't say it's like as synthetic as spice, but you get the same sort of effect, right? You definitely get a buzz. And now for your question of like, should somebody in recovery be mindful of what they're consuming? 100%. I mean, this is a very, very, very slippery slope. And I would not recommend anybody who has struggled with opiates in the past, try to mitigate their behavioral functioning by like ingesting this stuff. It's no good. And it's really hard to withdraw off of too.
It's highly addictive. I went through a period where I was taking like large spoon-feds of Kratom in my water all day at work. Like I literally could not stop taking Kratom, and I could not stop like doing it because, like you said, the withdrawal symptoms are pretty bad. Like your whole body hurts. Like my bones would hurt when I would stop taking Kratom. So it's no joke. I say that because I was reading a lot of wrong literature about it, and a lot of people are saying, "Well, if you're struggling with drugs, you should take Kratom because it's an easy way to get out of certain drugs." At the time, I was struggling with cocaine and other drugs, so I felt, "Oh, well, Kratom may be a nice substitute for all the other stuff that I struggle with." But it was bad. It took me into a worse place.
Totally. And that's the thing, man, is like, I always like to say this thing, and forgive my language, but there's this funny like meme that goes around the internet, and it's like, fuck around and find out. It's the fuck around, find out matrix. Like the more you fuck around, the more you're going to find out. And so that's kind of how it is with Kratom.
Yeah, I agree.
Who knows? Yeah, who knows what they're doing with that stuff? Because I know it kind of becomes illegal, and then they mix it up and it becomes legal. So who knows what it actually is anymore, too?
Well, and here's the thing that it goes to show how the addict brain works. So at the time when I was taking it, I was bringing it to work. So I was a CTO and I had a VP of engineering work for me, and he had a PhD. He has a PhD for biochemistry PhD from Stanford. So he knows all about molecular composition. So he's like, "Can I take a look at that thing that you're taking every day?" He's like looking at the jar. He's like, "Okay, cool." So he doesn't say anything. 2 days later, he's like, "Let's talk about that thing that you take." He's like, "Do you know that is basically an opiate? Not literally an opiate, but basically it has a lot of the same properties." I'm like, "No, you're crazy." So here I am telling the PhD biochemistry from Stanford that he's crazy, and I actually know what I'm talking about, and I should keep taking it.
Yeah,
I was misinformed. A while, like, I don't even know. I was the clinical director at Aspen Ridge. And the Westward came in, which is a publication. It's like the free publication here. And they were doing an article on Kratom, and they asked me to kind of, they interviewed me about my opinion about it. I really didn't have much of an opinion. So I asked, I went straight to the opiate addicts that I had, in the program at the time. And they were all like, they were not impressed by it. They were like, "Yeah, that's like," so that, I kind of took that, because I had these opinions. And I think one of my quotes in the thing, it was like, "It's kind of like a meth addict, drinking a Mountain Dew." And like that. I'd let people to believe that it wasn't that. I was one of the people that fed into like, "Oh, this stuff isn't that bad." Yeah.
That's hilarious. What a good analogy.
Yeah, that is a good analogy. So another thing, so moving away from the Kratom part of the story for a little bit, One thing that does catches my eye is the fact that, a more typical story is kind of going through something like AA or an NA and do a 12-step program. And that's not in your story. You went a different route. You went through this behavior modification program and so forth. So, but I'm sure that people that have done 12-step programs and whatnot. How would you draw the differences and the parallels of the two approaches to recovery? And I think from looking at both, you can probably extract, well, what are the things at the core that work? Because both ways work, right?
Mm-hmm. Totally. What a great question. And I think there are more parallels than there are differences, most definitely. We decided to go the route of quote unquote all pathways program because we thought that, both Robbie and I are not 12-step participants. However, there are so many characteristics and values that are taught within the 12 steps that we really employ in our programming. And I think this range true for any sort of fellowship group, right? A lot of what it's about is accountability. It's about community. It's about fellowship. It's about structure. It's about vulnerability. It's about submission. I think that's what rings true across any of these modalities, right? It's like you can do life ring or smart recovery or refuge recovery. And essentially all of them are, at the core the same, right? It's understanding that you have a problem that's unmanageable and whatever, I think the hang up so often in 12 steps is like this idea about a higher power. And so I think it's all about semantics. I think it's all about like how we define things or how we identify with things. And so many people get turned off of the 12 steps because of that. But really at the core, I think what it is, it's just a way to live. It's a blueprint, right? That has been successful. And so for us, it's like we have about 100 members in our program for Elevate. And I'd say over half of them are 12-step guys, whether that's CA or NA or AA. I think all of the core characteristics and values are ideally the same. There might be a few different words here and there. But it's really about understanding on a deeper level what is driving the behavior and how to operate on a level that is responsive rather than reactive. So in the similarities, it's, even if looking at like a non-fellowship based sort of program like what we have, I mean, I shouldn't say non-fellowship based because everything we do is about fellowship, right? It is about, Johan Hari's talk on his TED talk about the antidote to addiction is connection. And so I think that's really at the core of everything is like, how do we connect more with people and allow ourselves to learn from either other people's experience or mistakes or ourselves, but be able to share a space with others so that we can, what's the right word? I don't want to say like collaborate because that's not the right word, but we can confide in people and feel that sort of human connection. And so I think that's really what it all comes down to is like, where's the humanity on all this? Because I think, and obviously you guys are way more versed than me in sort of the psychological aspects of addiction, but really there's only a few different reasons why people become addicts, right? It's like, they want to feel validated. I think at the beginning, it's either to turn on good feelings or turn off bad feelings. And then there's some underlying causes from those. But at the end of the day, people just want to be seen. They want to be heard. They want to be loved. They want to feel a part of something. And so that's really the key characteristics in the overlaps between, 12-step and non-12-step fellowship. So I think it's just, the same core fundamentals with different stickers slapped on it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why I asked the question, because as you were narrating your story, I could see that. One thing that you said too, that caught my interest, you said when you were in prison, you were gravitating around people that had the same value system. Those are the words they use. So it seems like also having a value system is also something that 12 steps give you, as well as the all pathways kind of program that you guys have, right? It's not just having a connection, but it's having a connection with people that have the same value system.
100%. Absolutely. Yeah, that allows you to really, dive in and develop those connections and camaraderie. Because at the end of the day, I think a lot of people don't even really know what their values are. Right. And so first it's understanding like, well, what are my values? What do I care about? What do I believe? And then when you're around other people who share those same beliefs and operate under the same values, that's when the real kind of growth and connection can happen.
For sure. Yeah. Question. When, I this idea of sober living, I think a part of this is like explaining I think people like that come out of rehab, there's typically in having, been in rehab and worked in rehab, like there's this period where they're starting the treatment, discharge plan. They're like starting to say like, okay, what are you going to do after this? And that's where the recovery really starts. Like after, it doesn't start in rehab. Rehab gets you clean. It gives you some good ideas. It gives you some hope. But from there, it's like when it really starts. I guess the question is like, what is sober living? Like I knew what it was, and I was resistant to go into it. Like the idea of like being around people and being in like closed spaces and being, I wanted to be held accountable, but I wanted to be held accountable the way I wanted to be held accountable. So there's like a lot of, so explain, if someone were just like, tell us about sober living.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I think so. Sober living, is a community group home where individuals basically reside in a facility. I mean, we don't call them facilities. They reside in typically it's a single family home. So, just like any neighborhood house that you see. And there are program rules. So essentially the core tenets of sober living are, it has to be safe, has to be supportive. For us at Elevate, action is a big component of what we do. So, our program really helps to develop taking action on the things that we're actually learning. But at its core, I mean, it's an environment to where there's oversight so that people are, being drug tested. That goes to the safety aspect, making sure that, it's a safe place for people to go because there's different phases or there's people in different phases of their recovery while they're in a sober living. There could be people that are coming straight in from residential treatment, or people coming from Department of Corrections, or people coming right off the streets. And so people are in different phases, but I think the idea behind it is that it's a sort of community. You can think of it like a nuclear family, right? It's like there's a dynamic to where everybody has agreed to enter into this space with at least the same goal of maintaining sobriety. And so there's a number of different types of sober living programs. There's sober living programs who, first and foremost, are 12-step based. And so the requirement of these programs are, you're going to hit a meeting a day every day for do 90 and 90. And then, there's progression phases. There's other sober livings that they'll essentially manage the housing to make sure that it's safe, to make sure that, people aren't getting high in the house and, there's some semblance of structure, but they're kind of very hands off. And then there's programs like Elevate, like our program, which really takes the approach of, okay, we're going to be as hands-on as we possibly can. And one of our mottos at Elevate is Unreasonable Hospitality. And we can talk about the peer space after this, but it's meeting people where they're at, right? I mean, going back to my story, I mentioned, I had this epiphany that I was able to make a choice and be committed to the lifestyle that I wanted to live. And I think ultimately, at the end of the day, sober living gives you a space and gives you time to remove yourself from your last state of use so you can come out of the clouds. And to bring up your point, Miguel, about values, in a house with other people that share the same values so that you can make that decision on your own for how you want to live your life. And so that's what we do at Elevate is we have a hands-on approach. We have a ton of different programs, a ton of different activities, a ton of different community building events. And we like to sort of create a recovery lifestyle that is inclusive of where people are at, right? And so we do a lot of weightlifting groups and mountain biking club and book club. We do a mountain climbers club. So we have all these different events, being that we live here in Colorado and like being outdoors is, so accessible. It's giving people a framework to say, okay, cool. Like there's all this recovery stuff, right? All this like internal stuff. But like you mentioned, Jeff, recovery really starts once you're out of treatment, right? Like you learn some of the themes, the overarching themes in your life about how your psychology works when you're in treatment, but then like, what do you do with it? And so sober living is an area for people to then put it into practice and begin to create the lifestyle that's going to be successful for them.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, and then for sure. Yeah. Yeah. If you, say you're looking for a sober living, how do you differentiate the good ones from the bad ones?
Yeah, man, that's something that we have really tried to dive into because like Google doesn't give you any information, or if you go to somebody's website, it doesn't really give you any information because anybody can get, there's a program here and I'm not going to name names, but they've got, like 50 5-star reviews. They have a 5-star review on Google, but I know the type of program that they run and it's bullshit. And so it's like, in order for you to really find a program that caters to your needs, you got to do a little bit of research. But every state, I know every, major metropolis, at least for sure has, hundreds, if not more sober living programs. So I would just scour, the resources online and do some deep diving into like, okay, well, what am I looking for in a program? If I'm a 12-step guy, maybe I need to go to a 12-step program. If I'm more invested in, like whole person health, maybe I look for these websites that list out like, what are the things that you do? And really like with anything, it's like, it takes some investigation. So I would just reach out to any of the places that you're looking at and talk with their team, talk with their admissions people, talk with their, a lot of times, the owners are doing the admissions calls for a lot of sober livings because they're smaller businesses and they have, a couple of houses. So call and just talk, and see if it's going to be a good fit for you. I know for me personally, it's like, I'm a big person on intuition. And so like having a conversation with somebody will really give you some sort of feedback, that you can then make a decision with. But I wouldn't say just look up the best one look up on Google and see what the top 3 that come up, because ultimately it may work out for you, but it may not. Like you're going to have to put some effort into it. And I think that goes back to, what you put in is what you're going to get out. If you're just going to go and click on the first one because it's the first listing on Google, that may work out for you, but your recovery is so damn important. Like you need to put yourself in a situation or an environment that's going to allow you to be as successful as possible or give you the highest likelihood to succeed.
So related to this, so say, I came out of rehab and now I'm hooked up with a sober living house and I'm in there. You mentioned one program over there in Denver that's bullshit. So, I may join and I may feel like, oh man, this program is bullshit, but it could also be my addict brain not being comfortable with rules. Maybe I'm rebelling against things. So if I'm in a program, what are the red flags that I should look for to see if the program that I'm in is actual bullshit or not? Because I think it may be sort of hard for people to discern, hey, am I in a good program or not? So what should people look for once they're in it? And what's a good process to get out of that and go to the next?
I think the biggest thing is like everybody has a good mouthpiece, right? But if you go to a program and they say that they're going to do, if you're talking to their team and they're like, yeah, we do all of these things, and then you get there and then none of those things are being done, that's a really big red flag right away. So, and I think for some programs, it's because they set their expectations and their bar so low that like people don't expect anything. So they're like, okay, this is just what it is. But when you set the bar high and you have high expectations for yourself and your team and your staff and your community, it's really about the culture. And so I think it's a feeling thing. Like if somebody goes to a program and the feeling is off, right? And not knowing what to expect. There are good sober living businesses everywhere in this country. It's just finding the right ones. And so, I think especially with people, with addictive tendencies and personalities, it's like, sometimes people like to take the easy way out. And so they might not want to go to a program that has these high expectations because in the back of their mind, they're like, well, what if I don't succeed? Or, what if it's too hard for me or too structured? Oh, I don't need that much structure. I've got this on my own. And so really it's up to the decision of the member who's coming. But I would say it's really easy to tell whether or not a sober living is legit or not. Like, are the guys being randomly drug tested? That's like the biggest thing of all. Like that's first and foremost. That's been the biggest, indicator of the likelihood of success is like, okay, are you passing your drug test? If you're going to be in a program for 6 months or a year, are other guys getting tested? Is there randomization? Like, what's the consistency like? That would be the number one thing, I think. And then all the extra like bells and whistles are like, okay, cool. Well, you guys say you're going to do this, and are you following up with that? And how is that working?
Yeah, there's that reason we talked about when I was on your podcast. That idea of like being able to make the hard choices when someone relapses, when someone doesn't follow the rules, being willing to say like, you got to go. Like, and that's where it becomes a money thing. It's like, oh, I got, I got 4 beds in that house. I really can't afford to like let another guy cut out of here. But, maintain that line saying like, this is our policy, like, and sticking to it. The idea of like, I know a lot of these places will push accountability and push, this is what we're going to do for your kid or your husband or your, wife, like this is what, but you're right. Like, having consistent UAs and having them, when things happen, like following procedure, like, there are, I think a lot of sober livings will give you a chance, like a second chance. Some make you move out, move back in. Some make, and the second thing I think is like, especially for, just getting a job, like the idea, like get a job within 30 days, so, you got some of the places will be like, you could sit on the couch for 6 months, playing video games and there, no one says anything. It's like, and the rest of the guys are running around and going to work and running a program, I think the second thing would be the job thing and how you show up in the community and how you keep your space in that community clean and just your willingness to kick people out who aren't meeting the community expectations.
100%. Yeah. I mean, it's literally, we're trying to build self-reliance. So you hit on all those things, right? It's like the big factor in Elevate for us, like when we started was like, I'm not going to create a program that's just like, we call it a pay and lay. Fuck that. Like you are going to get active. You are going to, if you don't have a job, you're volunteering. Or if you're not in school, you're volunteering. We're not going to just let you hang out and chill. Like this isn't the chill spot. This is the like, let's get it together spot and do that. But then it's also following through with that. And to your point about like the financial aspects, it's like, especially early on when you only have, a couple of houses, it's like every bed matters and there's a ton of attrition and it's, it's a challenging business because it's, it's a cash flow business, but the margins are very, very small. And so sometimes you have to make decisions about like where certain people are at. And, I know personally, we've made decisions and we've been wrong on them, right? Giving people another opportunity saying, okay, cool. You relapsed. we need you to, go to detox, and you can come back to go to another house, and we're going to give you a second chance. And then we've also had, everything across the spectrum where, guys who have relapsed, like we have to ask them to leave right away, all the way to, guys who were in a house management position, they relapsed, and, we still know that they've been in our program for a year and they've done a ton of really good work. And so we're going to give guys the benefit of the doubt and give them an option to come back into our program if they meet certain requirements. And so I think, again, it goes to that point of like meeting people where they're at, but it's having that assessment of where people are at. And how do you track where somebody's at if you're not measuring? Can't manage it if you're not measuring. And so part of what we do is really try to measure the progress that our guys make. And I think, Jeff, since you left, like we had really started this whole effort to really make progression phases within the program. And so when somebody comes into our program, they're basically in orientation phase for the first 30 days, right? We call it base camp phase. And so there's a number of requirements that they have to meet. Like they have to meet with their peer coach every week. They have to attend all of the weekly groups. So we've got a process group, and we've got a support group. They have to do their chores. They have to get a job. And in order for them to progress into the next phase, which comes with, added benefits, right? So like you get a longer curfew. You can do an overnight once a week, et cetera. So as you progress in the program, you get more and more flexibility on how you control your life. But if you're not holding up that end of the bargain, right, there's no way for us as the management and the staff to be able to measure the growth that you've had. And so that's a big component of it. If somebody's not, taking this seriously, then they're not a good fit. And that's where we've gotten to, is like we've got an ideal customer avatar, and we know who that person is, and we know what that person looks like. And what that person does. And if they don't fit the mold, then guess what? It's just not the right program for you at this time. And so we've had to really come to grips with that, because it's like, we love to help people. We're empathetic, but not everybody's ready for the type of programming that we really do. So, I mean, definitely to your point, this is not a pay and lay spot. And this is like a let's get busy and get active spot.
Yeah. Not everybody's ready, and not everybody has the same genetic predisposition, right? So we just had an episode with somebody that looks at addiction from a genetics perspective. And it's sort of known now that somebody that has the addict gene, for lack of a better term, will have a much harder time recovering, right? So that person may relapse abnormally more than the average individual. So I think, that's why there's different programs for different people. But related to that, so what is the percentage of people that you encounter that relapse that you have to sort of kick out?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we've done a lot of work over the last 7 or 8 months to really organize our data to understand, okay, what's going on? How come people are relapsing at this 100-day mark? All these different data points, trying to measure everything. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought thinking about that. What exactly was your question?
No, the question is what percentage of people that you take in end up relapsing?
Well, I would say it's probably, I don't have a specific percentage for you, but I know our attrition rates we have about a 15 to 20% attrition rate per month. But that includes both positive transitions and also relapses. So I would say that probably about half of those, so 10% a month, are relapses. And so we have currently, as of today, we have 92 guys in our program. So that means, if we take 20% attrition on that, 10 guys are relapsing every single month. And so those can be across the board, though. That can be somebody who's been there for 2 weeks all the way up to 2 years, And so it's really trying to figure out what is it? Because it's different for everybody. Maybe this person needs a little bit more hands-on. Maybe this person needs a little bit less. So we're really trying to kind of nail down what that is. But I think it comes back to, for us, is we can't control that. All we can control is the culture that we're developing. And we understand that people are going to relapse. That is part of it. And it's being able to support them in that relapse so that, hey, we're not just going to cut you off and just say, okay, figure it out, right? It's like, how can we help support you to get you to a place that's going to be conducive to your success? So whether that's getting you into a detox, getting you into a residential treatment program, getting you back into IOP, getting you into another sober living, we're not going to just like throw you out to the wolves. So I think that's a big component too, is knowing that like our guys have this support, even when they relapse. I always kind of tend to disagree. I don't disagree with it, but it's, repeated over and over. It's like they say relapse is always a part of recovery. And I'm like, yeah, it is until it's not. Right. And so we have to operate under that impression that like, yes, it is a part of recovery and that's the space that we're in. But ultimately we're trying to get to the point to where like we're limiting the amount of relapses by the front end work. Like we always like to say, do the front end work to save the back end insanity. But again, it's not up to us. It's up to the members.
Oh, absolutely. There's only so much you can do. If I'm not doing the work, I'm not going to get better.
Yeah. And if you really think about that, 90% of the guys that you work with, stick around or, stay sober or like, and that's really an impressive number. When you first say 20% or, you're turning over 20% a month, I was like, oh shit, that's a lot. I mean, it's a lot, but it's not really. 10% of people relapsing in this business is not, in rehabs, people, throw around, but it's like literally maybe 10, 15% at a rehab that they're going to stay sober for 30 days after, and that's reality. That's the reality of this. This feels like and to say like 10%, so that's a great number, 90%, keeping 90%. So to start with, and to kind of work from there. I just want to kind of frame it up for some, but I think, AA is like 7%, so people that I don't really know how they really accurately like measure that one, but it's, people are going to relapse.
Totally. Yeah. I think we've been successful.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And I think so our average length of stay is 108 days right now. Obviously that changes a lot, but we just had a huddle earlier this weekend so in looking at our KPIs, like that's one of them. So 108 days is the average length of stay for one of our clients. Obviously what we found is like the longer that they stay in sober living, the higher likelihood for them to have a successful transition is. And so over the last 3 months or 4 months now, every single month, we've had more successful discharges than we have had relapses, which is great. That means somebody's either moving back in with their family, or they're moving into independent living, or they're moving into an environment with another member from the house, reintegrating back into, quote unquote, normal living. And so for us, that's a true testament of like the work that we're doing to try to really build this culture that's successful. And then it's now understanding, okay, cool. Once you've graduated from this program, how do we keep you more involved in this community as an alumni so that you can then pay it forward or still be connected to the community? And so that's a big focus of what we're working on now is like, how do we really build up this alumni program, so to speak, to keep these guys involved?
And that's the thing, like the idea that Miguel referenced Rick, who did an episode, and he runs a program in Texas that's 3 to 5 years long. That's how it works. And people, I don't think people really oh yeah, it's going to take some time to it's going to take some time. It's going to take time and commitment and work. This is, and to think spending a year in sober living, I can't spend a year. You can absolutely spend a year in sober living, and, it'll be great for you. Just commit, because it's not like something you just kind of do for 3 or 4 months and, and having the fellowship, having people come back, having, the fellowship, getting involved in a community is just like a huge.
Yeah, for me, a big realization around like recovery taking a while to really kick in was when I understood how much neuroplasticity needs to happen for your brain to now really become a different brain, right? And neuroplasticity is there and it's very possible, but it takes time, right? So you need to do constantly different things that you were doing before until the brain really starts shaping up differently for those new activities they're doing. So I love what you said about your program where you're really putting people into active mode, like right away, volunteering, doing other recreational activities like bike riding, weightlifting, whatever, have even, book clubs like that. Constant sort of influx of new activities that are different from the ones that you were doing before. That's what reshapes the brain pretty effectively, I think. Makes you happier.
Totally agree. That's our whole motto. It's like, it's do hard shit, right? Put yourself in uncomfortable situations because ultimately that's where you're going to build resilience. And it's the unforeseen things, right? Like in life, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know if you're going to go out today. I mean, it snowed like 3 feet here yesterday. So I got to go out in the car later on and drive on the roads, but I don't know if I'm going to get into an accident. And it's being able to prepare yourself mentally, physically, spiritually, so that when things do arise, you can handle them effectively and you can respond effectively. And so that's really the mission behind what we're doing. Yeah, it's fun and we get to go work out and like get stronger and feel good and get these endorphins and get the dopamine and all that. But it's really training their mind, right? To your point of neuroplasticity is like, how do we be more resilient?
Yeah, like I went through this stage not so long ago where my life was getting difficult in some ways. And I'm like, okay, because my life is getting difficult, I got to make it a little more difficult for my brain to do better. So I started running in the middle of the rain at 4 a.m.
I love it.
When it was still dark, pouring rain. I'm like, fuck it. Let's run. Not a long run, like 2 miles. Let's just do it. So, like super, super hard rain, still dark. Let's do it. And I did not like it. I'm like, I don't enjoy this, but I'm going to do it just to train my brain to do things that make me very uncomfortable that I just don't like.
Yep.
Because life is going to give you a constant stream of things that you don't like. But guess what? That's life.
I'll tell you what, I still struggle with every day, man. I cold plunge. And like, it's the hardest fucking thing in the world, getting up and saying like, okay, it's 40 degrees outside and I got to go jump in this 35-degree water for 3 minutes. And I come up with every excuse in the book and, I got to do this. And, I got to send this email. It's just like forcing yourself to do something that is really uncomfortable is really where you can develop that, mental fortitude and self-will so that, if that's the hardest thing you do every day, everything else in the day is easier. So it's like, that's what you're training for, is like getting up at 4 a.m. to go run in the rain. Who wants to do that? It's not about the running, right? It's about you persevering and saying like, hey, I made a decision and now I'm going to stick with this decision and I'm going to feel good about myself afterwards because I followed through with what I said I was going to do.
Absolutely. So I don't do cold plunges because I don't have the space to do it, but I do freezing cold showers in the morning is my next alternative. And I've been doing it for now a year and a half. But to your point, it's really interesting how even after a while of doing it, like I'm there, ready to go in the shower. My brain is telling me, no, don't do it today because it's raining outside. I'm like, because it's raining outside. Don't do it today because of whatever, fill in the blank. So my experience has showed me that my mind is not to be trusted. I love my mind and it's awesome in a lot of different ways, but there's also a lot of inefficiencies of the mind, and came to this understanding that the brain creates a mental model of the world because the brain's job is to protect you from the world. So it creates a mental model and is controlling that world and that model, but it's not always accurate. The error rate of that model is actually quite large. So you have to learn how to not listen to the brain sometimes. So when you're in front of the shower, in front of the cold plunge, in front of the 4 a.m. rainy run, you gotta not listen to that mental model in the brain that's trying to tell you, don't do this because you're going to get hurt, and just do it. Like Tony Robbins had this thing where he said, you got to train the mind so that when you say go, it goes.
Yep. Love Tony. 100%. Yeah. You use it as a tool. Don't let it use you as a tool.
That's right.
Do you think that, because when you talk about, that's all behavior modification.
Totally.
It's not like, you could, your mind can be like saying something to you, like telling you to do something, telling you to like not do something. As long as your body's moving in that direction, that AA is that way. It's like, pick up the phone, call your sponsor, get to a meeting, 90 and 90. It's all like behaviors, like in the TC, the therapeutic community world, it's all behavior. Like, I know you're angry, but look at that wall for a couple days. Like change, and think about it. Slow down and think about it. And
I totally agree with that.
Yeah. When you're looking at the wall,
like
when you're in monad, I guess it's called, right? When you're in this monad sort of punishment, I guess. What does that look like? Like, do you eat? So if they give you 2 days of that, I mean, do you eat? And how does that look like exactly?
So here's how it works. So you basically have to line up for the wall, and then you use your hand, right? And you have to stand 6 inches away from the wall. And all that you're allowed to do is think, blank, and breathe, right? And so what happens is, in a therapeutic community, usually they're peer run. And so what that means is, like, clients that are in the program have been promoted into positions to basically manage and, coordinate the happenings of the program. At least that's how it was at Peer 1. So they'll come by and check on you, once an hour, something like that. And say, hey, Bryce G, come off the wall, come off monad. And then you can talk to them and say, okay, hey, like, I need to go use the restroom, or, for the times, it's very structured and scheduled. So like, you're eating breakfast at the same time, lunch at the same time, dinner at the same time. So they'll pull you off the wall to go eat and stuff like that. So you can use bathroom breaks, and you eat and whatnot. But, if it's a really actually legit run monad session to where like the whole entire block is on monad, like, it's serious. Like, there's staff walking around, like, you can't, mess around and joke around and stuff like that. So it's pretty serious and it's challenging. Like, you wouldn't think like just sitting there is that hard. Like, oh, what, you're just sitting on a bench or standing, like, you can't do either. But I'll tell you what, if you do it even for a full day, like,
it's hard. It's really hard.
It's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah. And there's something really Buddhist about it.
Totally.
There's I practice, meditation every day, but I've dabbled with different kinds of meditation. So I went to do Zen meditation one day, and that's with your eyes open and you're staring at the wall. And we did it for an hour. So what you were saying reminded me of that. And, so I can imagine that even though it's not very comfortable to sit there for a couple of days, that there's some virtues of that,
Oh, totally. Yeah. You get through it and you're like, oh shit. Like, you have these revelations and like it's legit. And I in prison, I really got into Mahayana Buddhism. And so I had a Sangha and was meditating for hours every day. We would meditate for an hour in the morning, a couple hours in the afternoon, do a Sangha in the evening. And so you get to the point to where, you do it so often and you're sitting through that pain, right? Because in Mahayana, it's all about posture. Same with Zen, right? It's all about posture. It's about how you're presenting yourself, and like your back starts to hurt, or like you have an itch and like it's fighting that, it's resisting that and saying like, this is just a thought. This is just something that's happening. And you can either buy into it or you can let it pass. Let it pass. It's noticing it and letting it pass. And so the more that you do it and the more you practice it, I feel like the more you get out of it, but it's really, really, really challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, some of that's, like the idea of like sitting with your thoughts, being able to just sit with your thoughts for a moment and to think, and a lot of people don't do that well. Like a lot of people, the moments in time, I mean, when I do like plans, sober plans or, absence plans with people, it's always those moments in time where, from work to home, or like once I get home, there's like all these times where you're kind of left to your own thoughts, that really is when the cravings like start to escalate. So finding things to do in those time periods, finding things that like to occupy your mind, to like, staying busy, don't, going to meetings, going to things, activities like workout groups, and, to kind of continue to like occupy your mind until your mind kind of catches up and buys into that program, because it takes a while for your mind to buy into like, doing the behavior. You may have to do it 1,000 times, but your mind finally just goes like, I don't have to fight this anymore. I can just go do it. And I actually like, enjoy it, And I see that's when your character changed.
It's like, I listened to, and this is another like Tony Robbins thing. I know he talks about this, and there's this other guy, John Assaraf, and I went to one of his events like back in 2012. And the whole point was to say, okay, the average thought or feeling lasts like it's either 4 seconds or 7 seconds. 7 seconds. So if you can get over that and not react on that impulse or like buy into that emotion, if you can just notice it and observe it and let it go, even if it happens repetitively over and over, and it's like this ruminating thought in your head, give it 7 seconds. And so what we try to do is develop the tool, give people the tools to combat that, right? So like the breath work, meditation, reframing, like putting yourself in like a happy place, counting down. Like there's a number of different things that can kind of get you over that hump. And to your point, Jeff, it's like, even if it takes 1,000 times, if you are in a position to where like you're going through it, right? Like you're white knuckling it. If you can at least just have some self-awareness and some clarity on that, like this is temporary and it will go away. I think that's really, really helpful. But it's also like, if you don't know what you don't know and you don't have those tools, like you give into that because it seems like so overwhelming and you're just like, I have to do this right now. So it's just like that practicing like, hey, I can take a breath. I can take a breath right now. Hey, I can count down from 10. And then by the time it like that emotion or that feeling subsides. So I think that's important, is just like understanding that.
Gaining that new perspective. When you say, and I worked at Pier 1, so I know, I put people on loan at one point, and it's just that like you can't, they have a lot of time over there with people, so they can use that time, to kind of shape these thoughts and feelings and beliefs about things. So when someone is put on the wall, they're typically not like being accountable for something, they're acting irrationally, or they're, just like really, and they need to be removed from the community. They need to take accountability. And if you get on the wall and you're on there, and you initially get on the wall, like, he did this and I didn't do that. And like, I can't believe you're punishing me like this and that. And you're not taking any accountability and you don't see your part. Like you spend 10 hours on that wall, you can't help but like contemplate the idea that you had a part in that, or that it changes your perspective. It changes like, okay, like I get it. I can see, and they pull you off the wall and they listen to your message and they say like, and then they still hear that tinge of like, but it's like, I'll get back on the wall. Like this is about you taking accountability for yourself, and forgetting about trying to control others.
I think that's the biggest point about like, I wanted to elevate that had the same characteristics and functions of the TC, of behavioral modification, because I'm a firm believer in like, where your butt goes, your mind follows. Right. And so like, do it first, move first, and your mind is going to follow eventually. And so like accountability is one of the biggest aspects of what we do, whether it was your fault or not. And I like to employ this in my own life, right? And like I have a 1-month-old daughter. I have a fantastic relationship with my wife. We don't ever fight or anything like this because I think she's obviously so, emotionally mature, one of the most emotionally mature people I've ever met, because she takes accountability for all of her shit and I take accountability for all of mine. And even if one of the things that Pier 1 taught me is like, even if it's not your baggage, take accountability for it, right? Like good, bad, or neutral, like take accountability for it. I don't know if you guys have heard of this guy, Jocko Willink.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Huge fan.
I love his whole thing. It's like, Something good happens, good. Something bad happens, good. Like, you can take accountability for everything, and at the end of the day, you don't lose, right? You either win or you learn. And so I like to do that because, like, if you do take accountability for everything that happens to you in your life, say you're driving down the street, right? And somebody cuts you off and you have to slam on your brakes. Initially, that initial response is like, oh, fuck this guy, whatever. One of the things that I like to do to switch that is like, that guy he probably just pooped his pants. So I'm going to be gracious to him and understand that that's okay. And I take accountability for it, right? And I don't give somebody else the ability to rent space in my head. And so I try to do that. But it comes with self-awareness and stuff. It's hard.
I love that. And I think self-awareness is like the important part there. And it reminds me of something that my meditation teacher talks about. He talks about the first and the second arrows of life. So it's like, the life is always going to throw you the first arrow. Always. The guy's going to cut you off. Your car's going to break. The IRS is going to come calling you. First arrow. But we now have the opportunity to do this or not, which is throw a second arrow. The second arrow is now the story that we tell ourselves about that thing that happened. Like, the guy cut me off. Oh, he's a motherfucker. He's this, he's that. Or we could choose to not throw the second arrow. It's like, the guy cut me off. Period.
Yep.
No story.
Yep.
The guy cut me off. And then I hit my brakes. There's nothing more to that story other than that. And then you keep moving on.
Totally.
Right? So that's very, it simplifies life so much, when you act like that. Like, I just had this occurrence where my car completely died. Like, the engine just burned driving because it was probably an engine defect. So very expensive car just completely died. Now I have to basically sell it for nothing. Initially, there was a lot of attachment to what was happening and whatnot. Then I caught myself. The awareness kicked in. I'm like, oh, I'm throwing the second arrow at myself. The story is the car died, period. Nothing else.
I love it, right? It's like Jeff's point. He's like, you come off the wall and you say all these things. If you follow that with a but, that's the second arrow. But, boom, that's the second arrow. It's like, period. Yeah, I love that.
Like, that's it.
Yeah, one of the things that I still use today that I learned while working at the therapeutic community was like, when they say like your baby's hanging out. Like when they have a ton, I mean, like MODAD is just one of the things. They have like tons of different behavioral mod things. And they would dress people up as babies or chickens and make them dress like that for the whole day. They'd make them like underneath thresholds. If you walked under the threshold, you had to say something like, I'm a selfish bastard. And like, or if you go to the next, under next to the threshold, you'd have to say like, I'm a selfish bastard. And all that. I mean, it's an amazing model. It's people look at it, it's like harsh because it is like, but it's an amazing modification. Like it's what people need. But the baby hanging out thing was like when people were just being whiny and like didn't want to, do anything. And I brought that into my own relationship, and I was just, it changed my relationship. So, for the better, when I would just be like, I'm just being a baby.
Yep.
I want things to be my way.
Yep. I want what I want when I want it.
Yeah. And I'm just being a baby. Like,
baby.
It's just like, I'm just feeling a little freaking baby right now. And just let me have my moment and I'll come back and I'll be an adult, hopefully before I go to bed or something.
Well, and I think it's really, that's awesome awareness, right? For us to be able to recognize we're being babies. I think like next step after that is like, where is that coming from? Why am I being a baby about that? That comes after, obviously, once you're regulated and you get over it or you let it go, like you said earlier. Why do I get so caught up on these particular kinds of things? Does it go back to childhood trauma? Does this take me back to that moment in childhood where my mom didn't give me this thing and now I feel, like that sort of like introspection, I think is very healthy. And also give yourself a break. Like somebody said this the other day, which really caught my attention. This person said, you're going to be the most abusive person you'll ever meet towards yourself. You will be the most abusive person you will ever meet against yourself. And And it's true, like if we catch ourselves being a baby, then we may start beating ourselves up for it.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, back to it is what it is. I am being a baby, but I'm not going to beat myself up for it. Let me understand why. And that way I can better regulate myself in the future.
Totally.
So I say that because I do that a lot whenever I catch myself being a baby or being dysfunctional. Then it's like, oh, I'm being like that and I'm beating myself for it. Right. So that's also super healthy.
Yeah. Not moving into that. Like, and that's hard because that's part of like, it's like I'm being a baby because like, and it's kind of interesting to go back. I know why I act like a baby and act in titles at times. Yes, it did come from the way I was raised, and it, there is that voice like, Jeffy, don't need to feel any pain. Like, let's get him away from pain. Like, oh, let's not do anything hard. Like, I was saved from pain a lot. But it's just that like, like Bryce says that, or Miguel, you said like that insight to like kind of know. It's nice to know where it came from, but then it's just like a lot of people get hung up there. It's like, I need to be responsible. Like Bryce said, like I am an addict, but I also am responsible for it too.
And that's a good call out that we could get stuck in the why I am the way that I am. And then we don't move forward. It's like, well, I'm this way because I suffered this and this in childhood. And that's great. Now you know why. We have to eventually let it go.
Totally.
Oh yeah. You can't use it as an excuse. Like, well, it's like, we're not, we can go back and figure out why you act the way you act. And how you're kind of programmed. And that almost feels like a different person to you. Like, oh, this other person is the baby and or the other person was created by someone else and I'm just learning to like fight it off. It's like, no, that's you. Like you're responsible for it. Get over the blame game,
That's what I love so much about this peer coaching space. Is like how we like to create a frame around it is like everything in therapy is like the past, the why, right? And then everything with peer coaching is like the present moving forward. So it's like, okay, yeah, there's a point in time to where like this thing happened and you're feeling this way and you can rely on the past to answer the question why, but then understanding now, what are you going to do about it? Right. And so it's all of the things that we've been talking about today too, with the behavioral modification. There's a number of things that you can do about it. You can decide, you can change your thought, you can act in a different way. We have the choice, right? And so ultimately all of this stuff comes down to, and it's complicated, right? It's complex. It's a very dynamic situation because you get caught in the middle on some point in the spectrum. And it's like having the understanding or the ability to move forward in a way that's going to serve you the best. And that's really ultimately what's at the core of all of this, I think, in the whole continuum of care. It's like once you get from that pre-contemplation stage to, now you're 30 days into recovery and you kind of understand some of the things, or even a year into recovery and you understand some of the reasoning behind why you're acting in the way that you're acting. And then having the self-awareness to say, okay, well, here's what I'm going to do about it. So that's really the whole mission, is just like, how quickly can we become more self-aware so that we can do something that's going to be productive for us rather than reductive.
Awesome. Yeah. I think we got to look at wrapping this one up, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I was just going to say one last thing, that it's really exciting that, there are people like you have created programs like the one that you've described, because it seems pretty holistic. You talked about meditation, you talk about cognitive behavioral modification, you talk about putting people into active modalities. It's very comprehensive, it sounds like. And I think that's what people need, right? When they're out of rehab and when they want to start their real recovery. So it's super exciting to see programs like this.
Yeah. It's, and I can vouch it, right? Bryce and his partner, run a solid program, and it's impressive how they do it. It's impressive how they are committed to it. They're not just, like you said, sitting somewhere and just selling beds and people and kind of half-assing it, and filling in these gaps, like with the other projects you're working on, filling in, using peer. I've always thought peer coaches are underutilized, and they have an amazing knowledge, and just be able to, use, and give them opportunities too, like the peers opportunities to like progress and work on themselves while helping others. I mean, the idea is this, same idea of like serving others and, altruism. And, I think it's really impressive what you've been doing, Bryce, in a really short period of time. Yeah.
Well, yeah, thank you guys. I appreciate it. And, it's nothing fancy, right? It's keeping it simple. Do the simple thing over and over consistently, and you'll get good results. And that's what our belief is. And, sometimes as the visionary of this company, it's like, oh, you see these shiny things, right? And it's like, oh, well, we could implement this or this new software, and this will help optimize this and do this. It's like, no. At the core, it's like we do very simple things over and over and over again, and that's what gets results. And I think so many people try to look for like the hackable way to like, oh, how can I hack this or do this? It's like, no, it's brute force. It's over and over. It's habitualized. It's consistency over time. And if your time horizon is long enough and you don't quit, you'll be successful, period. So thank you guys. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for coming. This was awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Now, Bryce and I can go dig ourselves out of the snow.
Yeah.
Maybe get out of our places and hopefully enjoy the weekend.
No
All
doubt.
right, enjoy this all, guys. I hope everything works out for you.
Thanks,
Okay.
fellas.
Take care, guys. We'll see you.
Bye-bye.